Wednesday afternoon, a quaint neighborhood 1 minute, a crime scene the next, and not just any crime, cops say. A murder. The lifeless body of Vice Mayor Nancy Metayer Bowen inside her own home. Cell phone video shows another scene about a dozen miles away. The area quickly engulfed by law enforcement. An apartment complex in Plantation. Sources telling Local 10 this is where they nabbed the husband.
On the morning of April 1st, 2026, inside a government building in Coral Springs, Florida, a room full of city officials sat waiting. The meeting was supposed to start at 9. The vice mayor was expected. She was always expected because she never missed. Nancy Metayer Bowen was not the kind of woman who disappeared without a word. She was the kind who showed up early, the kind who texted agenda items at 8 in the morning, who called to follow up before lunch, who answered every message and returned every call. She had been doing it for years, first as an environmental scientist, then as a city commissioner, and now as the vice mayor of Coral Springs, the first Black and Haitian American woman to ever hold that seat. But that Wednesday morning, her chair was empty, her phone was ringing out, and nobody could reach her. A city staffer sent a text to her husband, Stephen Bowen. "Can you have her call us?" The reply came back casual, almost too casual. "Texted her," he said. Then a few minutes later, "She is not picking up." Now that alone might not raise alarms. People miss calls, people oversleep. But the people in that room knew Nancy, and Nancy didn't do this. Not today, not ever. So they tried again, and again, and again. Nothing. Then Stephen sent one more message, and this one changed the temperature in the room entirely. "Where is she?" he wrote. "Her car is not at home." Think about that for a second. Her husband is telling city officials that his wife isn't home, her car is gone, and he doesn't know where she is. He sounds confused, concerned even. But here's what investigators would later discover. At that exact moment, Nancy Metayer Bowen was still inside that house. She had been there all night. She wasn't missing. She wasn't unreachable. She was lying in the second-floor master bedroom, wrapped in blankets and black garbage bags, with 3 shotgun wounds on her body. And Stephen Bowen, he already knew, because according to a police affidavit, he's the one who pulled the trigger. What happened inside that house on the night of March 31st, and what unraveled in the hours that followed, is a story of betrayal so intimate, so calculated, and so devastating that it sent shockwaves through an entire state. Because Nancy Metayer Bowen wasn't just someone's wife. She was a rising political force, a woman who had survived grief most people couldn't imagine, a leader who was days away from announcing a run for the United States Congress. And the man accused of taking all of that away from her was the same man she had celebrated her wedding anniversary with just months earlier, writing on Instagram, "Cheers to love, growth, and building a beautiful life together." This is the story of Vice Mayor Nancy Metayer Bowen, and the night that beautiful life was shattered. To understand the weight of what was lost on the night of March 31st, you have to understand who Nancy Metayer Bowen actually was, not as a headline, not as a victim, but as a human being who clawed her way from nowhere to the edge of something historic. Nancy was born into a Haitian immigrant family in South Florida, first-generation American. No political connections, no family wealth, no safety net. What she had was a mind that wouldn't quit and a work ethic that made the people around her feel like they were moving in slow motion. She went to Florida A&M University, a historically Black university, and earned a degree in environmental science, regulation, and policy. Then she kept going. She got her master's degree in environmental health sciences from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, one of the most prestigious public health programs in the world. She didn't just attend, she graduated. And then she came back home to Florida and got to work. Before politics ever crossed her mind, Nancy was in the field, literally. She was an environmental scientist working on the front lines of disaster response and environmental justice across the state of Florida. When Hurricane Irma tore through in 2017, Nancy was there. When Hurricane Michael ripped apart the Panhandle in 2018, Nancy was there. When Dorian threatened to flatten everything in its path in 2019, Nancy was there again. She served on the Broward County Soil and Water Conservation District, working on water crises and community resilience. The kind of unglamorous, behind-the-scenes work that never makes the news but keeps entire communities from falling apart. And somewhere along the way, the work wasn't enough. Not because she got tired of it, but because she realized that the problems she was trying to solve on the ground were being ignored by the people making decisions in the rooms above her. So she decided to walk into those rooms herself. In 2020, Nancy Metayer Bowen ran for the Coral Springs City Commission, and she won. She didn't just win, she made history. She became the first Black woman and the first Haitian American ever elected to that body. In a city where people who looked like her had never held that kind of power, she sat down at that table and she belonged. For years later, in 2024, she ran for re-election. Nobody even bothered to challenge her. She won unopposed. And her fellow commissioners appointed her vice mayor, not once, but twice. But Nancy's ambitions didn't stop at the Coral Springs city limits. She was building something bigger. She had worked briefly in the office of former U.S. Senator Bill Nelson. She had connections to the Obama administration. During the 2024 presidential election cycle, she was tapped first by Joe Biden's campaign, and then by Kamala Harris's campaign to serve as their Florida Caribbean Vote Director, organizing voter outreach across the state's Haitian and Caribbean communities. The Florida Democratic Party eventually named her vice chair of Haitian American voter engagement. She was, by every measure, a rising star. The kind of political figure people point to years later and say, "I knew her before." And then there was the other side of Nancy's life, the side she carried quietly. On February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, a gunman walked into Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and opened fire. 17 people were killed. 17 more were injured. It became one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. Among the survivors that day was Nancy's younger brother, Donovan Joshua Lee Metayer. He was a student there. He made it out alive. But survival doesn't always mean the same thing as living. In the years that followed, Joshua battled schizophrenia. The trauma of that day never left him. And in December of 2025, just 3 months before Nancy would be found dead in her own home, Joshua took his own life. He was 26 years old. Nancy buried her brother and kept going. That's what she did. That's who she was. She absorbed grief like it was fuel and she converted it into purpose. Her friends say she was already channeling Joshua's death into her upcoming congressional campaign, planning to fight for mental health funding, for gun control, for the kind of systemic change that might have saved her brother's life. By late March 2026, everything was in motion. The announcement was supposed to come on Thursday, April 3rd. She was running for the 20th Congressional District, the seat held by embattled Representative Sheila Cherfilus McCormick. Allies had lined up. Support was pouring in. One close friend later said she was so excited about the momentum she was building, so ready to take her fight to Washington. Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who had been with her just days before, would later stand at her vigil and say 5 words that silenced a crowd. Nancy would have won that race. But Nancy never made it to Thursday because the most dangerous person in her life wasn't a political opponent. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone she'd need a campaign to defeat. It was the man sleeping in the bed next to her. The man whose Instagram bio read 3 words that, in hindsight, land like a confession: God, husband, armed. Stephen Bowen, 40 years old, a radiology technician at Delray Medical Center, a licensed professional, a Freemason, a member of a Broward County faith-based nonprofit called Men of St. Luke. On paper, he looked like a man of structure, discipline, and faith. On social media, he posted pictures from the shooting range. He documented his fascination with firearms the way some men document their golf games, casually, proudly, often. And on the night of March 31st, 2026, According to the Coral Springs Police Department, Stephen Bowen loaded a shotgun, walked into the master bedroom of the home he shared with his wife, and shot her 3 times. Then he went downstairs and went to sleep. The sun came up on Wednesday, April 1st, and the city of Coral Springs had no idea what had happened overnight at the house on the 800 block of Northwest 127th Avenue. The streets were quiet. The morning was ordinary. And somewhere inside that house, Stephen Bowen woke up, walked past the second floor where his wife's body lay wrapped in blankets and garbage bags, and started his day. At 8:00 a.m., a text message was sent from Nancy's phone to a local city official. The subject line read discussion items. It was the kind of message Nancy would send, routine, professional, organized. But investigators would later flag something about that text. The police report never confirmed whether Nancy had scheduled it before her death or whether someone else sent it that morning. Someone with access to her phone. Someone who was still inside the house. That text would be the last communication ever sent from Nancy, Metayer Bowen's phone. By 9:00 a.m., the meeting had started at Coral Springs City Hall. Nancy's seat was empty. The people in that room, including Police Chief Brad Mock and Major Edmund DeRosa, noticed immediately. This wasn't like her. Nancy didn't ghost meetings. Nancy didn't go silent. Something was wrong. A staffer reached out to Stephen. His responses trickled in slowly. Texted her. Then, she is not picking up. Then the message that would later haunt the investigation. Where is she? Her car is not at home. He was performing confusion, playing the role of the worried husband who doesn't know where his wife went. But surveillance footage would later tell a very different story. Cameras captured Stephen Bowen arriving at the home at approximately 9:55 a.m. that Wednesday morning, nearly 2 hours after the meeting started. He stayed inside until approximately 12:09 p.m. That means while city officials were texting him, while colleagues were calling Nancy's phone over and over, while the concern in that room was climbing toward panic. Stephen Bowen was inside the house, with her body, for over 2 hours. What he was doing during that time, only he knows. But when he finally left, he didn't go to the police. He didn't call 911. He didn't drive to City Hall and tell someone what happened. Instead, he drove to his uncle's house. And that's where the mask came off. According to the arrest affidavit, Stephen Bowen arrived at his uncle's home at around 10:00 a.m., though the surveillance timeline places his departure from the house closer to noon, so the exact sequence has been pieced together from multiple witness statements. What isn't in dispute is what he said when he got there. He told his uncle that he had done something to his wife, that she was not alive. His uncle asked the obvious question, why? And Stephen Bowen gave an answer that was as vague as it was chilling. He said he couldn't take it anymore. He didn't say what he couldn't take. He didn't explain what had pushed him to this point. He didn't describe a fight, an argument, a confrontation, just 5 words. Couldn't take it anymore. As if the act of ending his wife's life was a form of relief. But Stephen wasn't done. He didn't fall apart. He didn't break down. According to the police report, he asked his uncle to hold onto a shotgun for him for a few weeks. He told him that gloves or a bag would be needed to handle it. He was thinking about fingerprints, about evidence, about getting away with it. This was not a man consumed by guilt. This was a man managing logistics. Meanwhile, back at the house, the walls were starting to close in, just not fast enough. Police had been asked to do a welfare check. Officers arrived at the home but couldn't get inside. No one answered. No cars in the driveway. At that point, they had no legal authority to force entry. They couldn't break down the door without a warrant or probable cause, and all they had was a missed meeting and unanswered texts. But a detective circled the property and noticed something that sharpened the urgency. There was visible damage to the exterior of the house on the second floor. Damage that appeared to have come from inside the home. Damage consistent with force. Damage consistent with projectiles. Something violent had happened in that house, but they still couldn't get in. At around 11:23 a.m., Stephen's parents arrived. Nancy's mother had called them, worried sick, and asked them to check on her daughter. Stephen's mother would later tell police that her son had called her the day before Tuesday afternoon and told her he'd had a panic attack at work. He said he was going to talk to Nancy about it. She said she didn't know of any marital issues between the two of them. Nothing that would explain what came next. No history of violence. No warning signs. At least none that anyone had seen or admitted to seeing. The minutes dragged on. The police were stuck. The family was frantic. And then at 1:15 p.m., Stephen's uncle made a phone call that broke the case wide open. He dialed 911. The call was released to the public 2 days later, and the audio is gut-wrenching. You can hear the urgency in the voices. A family member practically begging the dispatcher to send officers to break down the door. Tell them to break down the door by whatever means, a woman's voice says on the call. The 911 operator responds calmly, almost clinically, explaining that without a warrant or probable cause, officers can't force entry into a private home. Then a man's voice cuts in, Stephen's uncle, and what he says next changes everything. "I'm gonna give you a reason," he says. "My nephew, her husband, came to my house this morning." He didn't finish the sentence on the call. He didn't have to. That statement, a family member telling police that the suspect had come to him and essentially confessed, gave officers the legal justification they needed. Exigent circumstances, a potential crime scene, a possible victim still inside. But police didn't go straight to the house. Not yet, because by that point they had already been tracking Stephen Bowen. Law enforcement had flagged his vehicle, a black Ford F-150, and license plate readers had picked it up moving through Fort Lauderdale. Detectives followed the signal. At approximately 1:39 p.m., they watched his truck pull into the parking lot of an apartment complex at 551 Northwest 42nd Avenue in Plantation, about 15 minutes south of Coral Springs. And what they saw next confirmed what they already suspected. Stephen Bowen stepped out of his truck and made contact with another man. He handed him a long bag, the kind commonly used to carry rifles or shotguns. The man took the bag inside an apartment and came back out without it. He also placed ammunition boxes inside his own vehicle on Stephen's behalf. Stephen, meanwhile, had already removed the license plate from his truck, another calculated move. Another step in a plan that had clearly been thought through well before the sun came up. The man with the bag would later tell investigators that he and Stephen were Freemasons. He said Stephen had asked to meet him to discuss an upcoming lodge meeting. He said he had no idea Stephen had been involved in anything criminal. He said he didn't know what was in the bag. Police didn't wait any longer. They moved in. As officers swarmed the apartment complex, SWAT vehicles, squad cars, guns drawn, witnesses in the building described hearing what sounded like an explosion of activity. "We just heard a big bang," one resident later told a local news outlet. "We looked out the window and we see SWAT cars, cop cars, just everything everywhere, guns drawn." And Stephen Bowen, the man who had spent the entire day texting colleagues with fake concern, driving across Broward County disposing of evidence, and sitting in his murdered wife's house for 2 hours, looked up at the approaching officers and said 6 words that sealed his fate. "OS, they're here for me." He was taken into custody at 2:35 p.m. He did not resist. He did not run. And from that moment on, he did not say another word. He invoked his right to an attorney and went silent. Now it was time to go inside the house. A SWAT team forced entry into the home on Northwest 127th Avenue shortly after Stephen Bowen was handcuffed in that Plantation parking lot. They moved through the ground floor first, then up the stairs, and in the second floor master bedroom, they found exactly what Stephen's uncle had tried to tell them was there. Nancy Metayer Bowen was lying in the bed. Her body had been wrapped in blankets and then placed inside black garbage bags. She showed no signs of life. She was pronounced dead at the scene that afternoon, though investigators believe she had been dead since the night before. Roughly 18 hours. 18 hours during which her husband slept in the same house, woke up, checked his phone, responded to text messages, drove across town, handed off a weapon, and never once called for help. Near her body, investigators recovered 3 spent shotgun shells. A preliminary examination revealed a gunshot wound to her left shoulder, though the full extent of her injuries would require a complete autopsy. On the bed beside her was the pillow, the one with burn marks scorched into the fabric and a piece of string tied around it, fashioned into a crude makeshift silencer. It was the kind of improvisation that spoke to planning, not rage, not a momentary loss of control, planning. He had thought about the noise, he had thought about the neighbors, he had thought about being heard. And then he had gone to sleep. The shotgun itself was recovered later that evening from the apartment in Plantation, still inside the bag Stephen had handed to his fellow Freemason just hours earlier. Ammunition boxes were also seized from the man's vehicle. The weapon, the shells, the silencer, the garbage bags, the removed license plate, the handoff of evidence to an unsuspecting third party, every piece of it pointed in one direction. This was not a crime of passion discovered in its aftermath. This was an execution followed by a cleanup operation. On Thursday, April 3rd, the day Nancy Metayer Bowen was supposed to announce her run for Congress, Stephen Bowen was instead standing in a Broward County bond courtroom. He appeared briefly before a judge. He said nothing. His attorney advised him to invoke his right to remain silent, and he did. The judge reviewed the probable cause affidavit, confirmed the charges, premeditated first-degree murder and tampering with or fabricating physical evidence, and made the ruling without hesitation. No bond. Stephen Bowen would remain locked in the Broward County main jail while the investigation continued. Online court records at the time did not list a defense attorney of record. No one from his family spoke publicly on his behalf. No statement, no explanation, nothing. And while Stephen Bowen sat in a cell saying nothing, the rest of South Florida couldn't stop talking about the woman he had taken from them. The tributes started pouring in within hours of the news breaking on Wednesday. But by Friday evening, April 3rd, they became something bigger. Something that Nancy herself would have organized if it had been anyone else. Hundreds of people filled the front lawn of Coral Springs City Hall for a candlelight vigil. They came from across the city, across the county, across the state. They wore orange, Nancy's favorite color, the color of her beloved Florida A&M University. Some wore green. Some carried white candles. Some carried flowers. Some carried nothing but grief and the need to be near other people who understood it. The vigil lasted more than an hour and a half. Dozens of speakers took turns at the microphone, friends, colleagues, mentees, state legislators, members of Congress. The service was streamed online and translated live into Haitian Creole because Nancy's community didn't stop at the English-speaking world. She had spent her career making sure of that. Coral Springs Commissioner Joshua Simmons, the man who had called Nancy his battle buddy, stood before the crowd and said what everyone in city government was already feeling, that City Hall was now incomplete, that the commission had lost not just a colleague, but the person who pushed them all to be better. She had led the charge on environmental sustainability in the city. She had fought to create a dedicated sustainability department. She had joined international organizations committed to climate action. She had been trying to establish a solid waste authority for all of Broward County. And now the chair where she sat and fought for all of those things was empty. City Manager Catherine Givens, her voice heavy, told the crowd that calling it a dark day was an understatement, that there were no words for the depth of the loss, that Nancy had given so much of herself to the city that her absence felt less like a void and more like an amputation. Congressman Jared Moskowitz stepped to the microphone and spoke with the rawness of a man who had just seen someone's entire future erased. He told the crowd he had been with Nancy just days before, that she had just buried her brother, that she had been preparing to announce her congressional campaign, that she would have won. He paused and said he and Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz would go to the floor of the United States House of Representatives. The body Nancy would have served in and speak her name into the record. But perhaps the moment that cut the deepest came from a young woman named Crystal Louidor. She was Nancy's mentee, the founder of a nonprofit called Gen Z Puhidi. She told the crowd that Nancy had driven her to her very first advocacy event years ago in North Miami, that Nancy had called purpose out of her, taught her how to carry herself, showed her what it meant not just to speak but to stand, not just to care but to act. And then Crystal said something that no one in the crowd was prepared for. "I'm honest," she said. "I'm still in disbelief. Ever since she died, I called her phone every day, just hoping that I could hear her voice one more time." The silence after that sentence was deafening. The next day, Saturday, the city held a peace walk at the International Peace Garden in Coral Springs. The mayor led it. Neighbors and friends walked together through a park in a city that would never feel quite the same. That same night, a second vigil was held at the Freedom Lab in Miami, a community center Nancy had been connected to through her organizing work. Loved ones laid down flowers and lit candles. One colleague, Trey Johns, said through tears that Nancy was such a power and that she would be so greatly missed. Another organizer asked the crowd a simple question: "Has anybody ever come to you and said anything bad about her?" The answer was silence, because the answer was never. And yet the hardest truth of this entire story might be the one spoken by Jepsi Metelis, the director of Suntla, a Haitian community organization whose leadership program Nancy had been part of. She didn't talk about Nancy's politics. She didn't talk about her achievements. She said something far more devastating. "He really robbed us," she said, speaking about Stephen Bowen. She was working hard, doing good work, and we never imagined that she was living in this personal hell. That word, hell, is where this story lands and refuses to leave. Because from the outside, Nancy Metayer Bowen had built something extraordinary. A career forged through education, resilience, and relentless service. A political future that was weeks away from its biggest chapter. A public life so full of warmth and commitment that hundreds of people showed up on a Friday night to stand on a lawn and cry for her. But behind the front door of that house on Northwest 127th Avenue, something else was happening. Something no one saw. Something Nancy never spoke about publicly. And by the time the world found out, it was too late. Domestic violence does not care about your resume. It does not care about your degrees, your title, your ambitions, or how many people love you. It operates in silence, behind closed doors, inside relationships that look fine from the outside and feel like prisons on the inside. Nancy Metayer Bowen was a vice mayor, a Johns Hopkins graduate, a woman who had shaken hands with presidents and survived the kind of family tragedy that would flatten most people. And she was still not safe in her own home. Stephen Bowen sits in the Broward County Jail tonight, held without bond, awaiting trial on charges of premeditated murder and evidence tampering. He has not spoken publicly. He has not offered a motive beyond 5 empty words, couldn't take it anymore. The investigation is ongoing. The case has not yet gone to trial, and under the law, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the facts laid out in the affidavit, the shotgun shells, the garbage bags, the improvised silencer, the hours spent inside the house after the killing, the disposal of the weapon, the lies texted to colleagues, the calm confession to a family member, those facts don't whisper, they scream. Nancy Metayer Bowen was 38 years old. She was a scientist, a public servant, a trailblazer, a sister who buried her brother and kept going, a leader who was days away from the biggest announcement of her life. And she was taken not by a stranger, not by a political enemy, not by some faceless act of random violence, but by the man who promised to love her in the home they were supposed to share on an ordinary Tuesday night in March. If this story did anything for you, if it made you think about someone you know, someone you haven't checked on in a while, someone whose smile might be hiding something heavier than you realize, then let it move you to act. Not tomorrow, today. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-799-7233. Save it, share it. You might never need it, but someone you love might. Nancy Metayer Bowen deserved to make it to Thursday.